Welcome to the podcast for real-life heroines. Let's embark on a journey that unveils the extraordinary stories of everyday women who redefine what it means to be a heroine or hero. Life is a tapestry of inspiration and magic, and today's episode is no exception. Here's your host, Susanna Liller.
Welcome, everyone. We are about storytelling on this platform. I get to, because it's my great privilege, I get to invite women to tell their stories because they are a great source of inspiration for all of us. We learn from them and we think, hey, maybe I could do something like that. And all I'll have to do is put one foot in front of the other and try. Often I found that these stories follow a particular pattern known as the heroine's journey, which has always been known as the hero's journey, but I talk to women on this podcast, and it's a journey that starts with a call, an urge, an idea to do something that might be different in somebody's life. And if the call is followed, it involves leaving life as the way it was before. Sometimes we call that our comfort zone, and proceeding on a journey basically into the unknown, which is often challenging, but at the same time, it evolves the heroine. My guest today is Sheila Humphreys. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you.
And Sheila is going to tell us her story. And I want to start with a brief bio and tell you a little bit about her. So in the late 1970s, several women graduate students at University of California, Berkeley, approached the head of African American Studies, Professor Margaret Wilkerson. She was the director of, go ahead, Sheila.
She was not a professor. She was an instructor without security of tenure.
Okay. So, and you just feel free to interrupt me because there's so much that we're going to talk about, and I'm sure that you're going to need to do that again. Anyways, they said they wanted to propose a set of workshops that would expose women students to engineering and computer science. And up until this time, the Women's Center at Berkeley had been focused primarily on helping women in the community who wished to return to college. But under Wilkinson's management, it pivoted to become an information clearinghouse for women's research, as well as a place where current women students could come for counseling and support. Wilkerson agreed, asked the associate director of the Women's Center, and here we introduce Sheila Humphreys, associate director of the Women's Center, to work with these STEM students to promote opportunities for women in computer science, math, physics, and engineering. And as Sheila has said to me, it thus began, because she said yes to that call, a 40-year journey odyssey in which she applied boundless energy and passion to the problems facing minority groups who wished to pursue what were once considered untraditional careers. And she nurtured and she advised generations of pre-college, undergraduate, and graduate students to not just pursue their dreams of higher education, but successfully achieve their educational goals, particularly in STEM fields. I'm way before the coaching movement ever became a movement and ever anybody heard of a coach in the way we think of it now, but definitely, Sheila, you were coaching all of these students. And she was instrumental in the creation and development of many successful intervention and mentoring programs to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the Berkeley campus. And as she and I talked, and she told me her story, she kept referring back to the education she got at Smith College, which really gave her so much to help her be who she is and to do what she did. She graduated from there in 1963, And here's what really surprised me. You just heard what she accomplished at Berkeley. And at Tufts, she earned a PhD in Francophone African literature in 1974. So she was not really at all, I think you would agree with me, Sheila, a STEM student. But she went to the West Coast, became the assistant dean of the admissions at Mills College. And after she learned that mathematics was the critical filter precluding women from entering STEM fields, she helped to recruit math and science-oriented female high school students to Mills and encourage them to enroll in a fast-track pre-calculus program. That really was what I think got people's attention and why you were recruited in 1977 to work for Berkeley. And just let me say, repeat that. After learning that mathematics was the critical filter precluding women from entering STEM fields, so that really set off your desire, your call to advocate for the underserved in whatever category, I believe. Wouldn't you say, Sheila? Yeah. So before I start, we have so much to talk about, and you've had many leaving your comfort zone events throughout your 40-year odyssey at Berkeley. And I think what I have to do at the beginning is have this disclaimer, because you have said to me more than once, many times, Susanna, but you know that I didn't do all these things alone. And I want to say
Certainly not.
you
Certainly
didn't. You didn't. And I think if you had had your way, you would have invited everyone who helped you and worked with you to be part of this conversation. But I have said to you, Sheila, this is your heroine's journey story. So we know that there's a whole of it takes a village to do what you have done, but we're learning from you about your story and your part in it. And thank you very much for participating today. So are you ready to hear my questions for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So maybe this is because as an English major, my question, how did a French major at Smith, then a fellowship recipient at Tufts, who wrote a thesis on Black African French literature, so think of that, people listening, very, niche, end up helping students at UC Berkeley in engineering and computer science. And we just heard a little bit of how that happened. Students came and said, hey, let's have workshops. But what was the call to you when you heard that? You didn't obviously say, no, I'm all about French. What was that like?
Well, the transition from Mills, where I did teach French as well as serve as assistant dean of admissions, the transition was really based on the work I did for and with Professor Lenore Blum, who had been denied a position at UC Berkeley because of nepotism rules. She was a mathematician, but her husband was in the same department. So she was full of energy and I would say some anger, and she enlisted me to work on recruiting women and through her pre-calculus program. And I want to mention the sociologist Lucy Sells, who's now gone, but she's the one who discovered that 74%, I think, of Berkeley women freshmen had not completed 4 years of calculus, which barred them from all of the STEM fields and of some of the social science fields too. So I got indoctrinated by Lenore, and we were part of a larger Bay Area network called the Math Science Network, and we put on conferences for girls in grades 7 through 12 every spring at all different kinds of sites at Mills and community colleges and universities to encourage women to take math and to consider STEM-based fields. So my transition to Berkeley was really because I had worked on these programs with Lenore, and I was recruited by Margaret Wilkerson.
Okay.
And then the second thing is that the two women who came and asked, two women who were so key in this movement were Dr. Barbara Simons and Dr. Paula Hawthorne. They both were reentry women, divorced and with children, and they had managed to complete their PhDs in the rigorous field of computer science without having taken a computer science major, since it didn't exist at the time, managing their responsibilities as mothers. And they wanted to open the door for other women like themselves, not just undergraduates, but other reentry women. And so the first, so that's the answer. So I got to Berkeley because of the work I had done at Mills, really.
No. And never, I'm assuming, never did you say, oh, what about French? Maybe I want to go back there. Maybe I want to write a book based on, never thought of going back to what you were doing before?
Well, I've thought of it a little bit in between, but this was in the early 1960s. And when I was a graduate student at Tufts, my husband was an intern at Boston City Hospital. And it was a time of turbulence, and it was the civil rights movement. And I thought, why am I studying French literature? I've done Racine, Corneille, and Molière. This is boring. I need to do something more relevant. And so that's why I chose on the West African author Leopold Senghor, who was also the first president of Senegal and wrote the key work called On African Socialism, which was, a pattern for all of the, the newly liberated colonies of Africa.
Yeah.
And so that was how I migrated into, and
Right.
that gave me a sense of slighter, more relevance than studying classical French literature.
Yeah. And so it stirred the pot inside of you to start this advocacy. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about your brain right now, and the right and the left side. And the right, I could see the French poetry and everything, but then there's the so much of math and science and STEM is all in the logical left brain. And so you must have had that well developed and at the ready, and it would have to be in order to learn a language. You use that part of the brain, so you weren't just esoteric and in your studies. I think you were prepared to jump.
Well, actually, one of the things that I really delighted in was that in the engineering milieu, it is a foreign language. And so I thought it was funny. I thought it was amusing. And sometimes I misused certain technical terms, but I think, truthfully, having a PhD is a really good credential to have. And that did help me gain acceptance and trust in the academic milieu. They didn't, I mean, of course, I wasn't going to be teaching any scientific subject. In fact, my mother was a journalist, and she drummed into us three children that we were about words in our family. We were not good at math.
Yeah.
And even though my father was a doctor, but yeah.
Yeah, but that was then a very traditionalist society that you were raised in. And my mother, an English teacher, similarly. And I wasn't good in math. So next question for you, Sheila. And so I know that you helped to create the Excellence in Diversity Student Program in 1986, which, by the way, tripled the number of minority graduate students enrolled. And you talked to me about how much you advocated, you loved advocating for these underrepresented groups. And I'm wondering, what is it about these students that drew you to them?
Well, first of all, my father was an Irish immigrant, and he was a ship's doctor for many years, and then he wanted to come to the United States, and he ended up in St. Louis. And I think I gained from being the daughter of an Irish immigrant whose whole family was back there, the sense of marginalization, feeling marginalized sometimes, and sometimes at cultural odds. So I had that. And my mother was very poor from a small town in Audrain County, Missouri. And she made her way. She was very bright, but she had to work all the way through her schooling. And so I had a sense of identity with marginalized people. And so the reentry program was for marginalized women who didn't have access to the university. And we did create a successful reentry program, and with many whose purpose was to prepare women for admission to graduate school in computer science. And it was very successful. I was then hired to create a minority graduate program by Carl Piester, who was our dean. And so then my scope broadened from just women to students of color, underrepresented students. And that was, so that was very rewarding and very challenging. There was no policy at that time at the campus level, no affirmative action policy at the graduate level. There was plenty of stuff going on since the 60s for undergraduates, but so it was fun to work with faculty and create a policy. It was fun to design a program from scratch. And I based it on what the women's colleges were doing, because they were losing students to coeducational schools, which had barred women from applying. So I, working with faculty, we created an active outreach program and started going to historically Black universities and going to women's colleges to talk to them about graduate school. And so I did this in partnership with some really wonderful faculty. They were, at that time, they were all male. But that was, so we did recruitment. And then the next step for advocacy was when these students applied to Berkeley. They were applying from Howard University. No, we hadn't had students from Howard University. So, so the faculty were learning about the differences in curriculum, and the applications looked different. And so there was a whole process of trying to change the culture and having faculty understand what it looked like, what those schools, how they taught, and that there might be a gap when they got to Berkeley.
You told me that a piece of it was that so many of these students were, as you put it, racked with self-doubt. Like, could they do it? And you also helped talk with them and guide them through that block.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think to a certain extent, I would say minority students today still suffer from self-doubt. That, they because when you come to a university, a big university, and you come from Prairie View or North Carolina A&T or University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and in a graduate group, and other people are from the Ivy League or Duke or, Carnegie Mellon or Stanford, you don't start out at the same level. There is a gap for some students, not all, in terms of the pace of the curriculum and the kinds of courses that you may or may not have taken. So there's some of it is factually based, but so that's why these feelings are called, and you've heard of this, the imposter syndrome.
Yes. Yeah.
So they feel as though they're imposters in this milieu. So now there's been a lot of attention paid to imposter syndrome, and faculty admit, like our dean, Sue J. King Liu, who was always at the head of her class everywhere at Stanford, admitted that she sometimes experienced imposter syndrome. Men the same.
Me too.
And so part of that coaching, as you call it, or mentoring or advising, is trying to affirm people's ability, to affirm their ability, to try to help them gain confidence. And concretely, we did initiate some transition programs so that students could come in the summer before they started graduate school and do some, get used to this community, do some, yeah.
Things
like
I'm
that.
wondering, because the work I've done in consulting and coaching with women, we talk about the imposter syndrome, and we talk about, I'll say to them, what would I be surprised to hear about you? And they'd say that I lack confidence. And here are women at the highest levels of an organization. And I know that you can't just say, how can you not have confidence? You're so smart. You can't just tell them. You can't stick it on them. I wonder if maybe you could even share a story of how that you remember that you particularly helped somebody gain that help with that gap of confidence.
Well, there are many examples, but remember, there were very few women in the department then, and there were very few minority students. There were no Black faculty for the students to identify with. In the computer science department, the first woman was hired in 1972, and the second one not until 1991, I think, Kathy Yellick. So they didn't have people who looked like them with
Right.
whom to identify. Therefore, we imported role models all the time. And, we got women from industry or from the government. We also instituted a weekly with the women's graduate group, we have a women's graduate group was started in the late 70s with Paula and Barbara and others, and they met every single Friday, just the women, until today. It still goes on.
Mm.
So they could talk to each other and trade stories. And one story was told by Dawn Tilbury, who's now an extremely successful roboticist at the University of Michigan. She said, when I go to these lunches, well, I went to these lunches my first year, and I thought because of that about half of the students in our department were women because of this lunch of this community. And then I realized that we were, less than 20%. So I think my point is that we addressed it in several ways by bringing role models until there were women faculty hired. The first Black faculty member wasn't hired until 1996.
Wow.
And so many Black students went through and got their PhD without a single Black faculty member.
But you were there, Sheila, and your job was they knew that they could come to you for.
That's right. They could come to me for confidential things. And this is a problem for all graduate students, but it was particularly acute for women, the issue of self-confidence. And so there's an exam, an oral exam that they have to take, around the end of the first year to show that they're really ready. And the failure rate was higher for women. And I don't want to say that was true for minorities because the number is so small, it wouldn't be statistically significant. But that was one problem. And also, there were issues of getting along with their faculty advisor. So in a PhD program, you're working with somebody for at least 5 or 6 years. And if you don't get along, if the chemistry isn't right, you're not going to make progress. So at a certain point, and this is true for all graduate students, but at a certain point, this group, which became very strong, it's named WICSE, Women in Computer Science and Engineering. They did a survey. I helped them. I worked with a professor, Janet. She's now a professor at Pomona. We did a survey of the women who dropped out. And it was a very rigorous survey. And the two reasons that came up mostly for why those who did not finish their PhD were problems with the advisor or, quote, personal reasons. And when you looked into the personal reasons, they were students who hadn't passed the prelim. You have a chance to take it 2 more times, but they didn't have the grit and determination or the confidence to want to do that.
Right.
And the same for underrepresented students that,
Yeah.
So they didn't have any role models.
And it occurs to me just what we're trying to do here with sharing your story. You with them were sharing stories of successful women and how they were managing to get past the challenges. And
those women would come and talk directly to the students. They would come to the Friday lunches. We had a number of grants where we, paid for people to come from the East and speak. And I would say all of the really important women in engineering and computer science came to talk to our women at Berkeley.
Women support women. It's so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I'm thinking too that people listening might be thinking, but what about Sheila? I'm sure at that time there weren't a whole lot of women in positions of authority doing the kinds of things that you were doing. Did you ever feel like you needed somebody to help you through, or did,
Sure, I had plenty of times when I needed to vent, but I was the first person in the position that I had, but then in the early 80s, a diversity coordinator. But now every department has one. In
yeah,
fact, now every department has to have a faculty member designated diversity
right.
diversity coordinator. So, and I do remember I of course I had an academic appointment. That was really helpful. Why did I get an academic appointment? For one reason, because of my PhD in French. Made no sense whatsoever, but that really helped me. And the second thing, when I would feel, I do remember bursting into tears a few times in the chairman's office, but I was really fortunate to have a really close, true, collaborative relationship with all 10 chairs that I worked with. And there was plenty of resistance by the faculty, particularly in the admissions process. We don't want to lower our standards. That was one reason, still being given today. And another one was, it's unfair to the student to put them in this environment. How are they going to survive? And so, that continues. But that would be discouraging, but I always had the support. And the chairman who backed me on the Excellence in Diversity program was Gene Wong. And he said, look, we're going to make mistakes. If we don't make mistakes, it means we're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so what about, I hear that the French eventually kind of played its way in there and helped you. It was a stepping stone, perhaps. But what about your own qualities or what attributes that you might have that just kept you going? Like there would be people that would sit in that and cry their eyes out and just leave and say, forget that. There must be something. How would you
Well,
describe it?
I mean, every student, his story, when they encountered bumps on the road, is individual. So the fact I had to make sure that I was completely trustworthy.
Yeah.
Trust is a fundamental quality that needs to be in every mentoring relationship.
Right.
Sometimes the student was not, the student was not being well treated. And so I could consult without revealing the facts. I could consult with the chairman or the vice chairman or a faculty member in that group or the faculty member herself or himself. And what kept me is every relationship with a student is an I thou. You get as much out of it as they do or as you put into it and they put into it. So it was very enriching,
Yes.
very enriching.
Yes.
And I can remember one. So here, I'll give you an example. There was a Black PhD student who had been a football star in his undergraduate university, and he was, recommended to us. And when we took in a student, then I considered it my duty to kind of look out for them. And he didn't pass the prelim. And it was a he. He complained to me that there was a member of the committee of 3 was prejudiced. And I investigated and I concluded that this was the case. So I could go to the chairman and say, this is an issue of prejudice. And the chairman quietly replaced that person on the committee, this oral exam, and the student passed. And today the student is a tenured professor with a stellar research record at an Ivy League college.
Wow. Wow.
He did not know that I did that.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing happened, and so if the atmosphere in the group, the research group, could also be very demoralizing for women, for example, again, in the early years, a student could be placed in a lab under the direction of a faculty member in which Mandarin was spoken by everybody except the student. And so she would be left out of their lunch, people would go out to lunch together, or it would be difficult culturally, the
Very,
vibe would not be friendly.
no, oh my
But
goodness.
that kind of thing, you can't speak, you have to speak in language when everybody can understand in your lab meeting. So I was able to take these issues to the larger faculty because by then the chair, people, I didn't say things that were silly.
Yeah, wow. So, it's interesting, and it bears repeating that the way you answered first was trust, that they had to trust you. And
Yeah.
that absolutely is so important. And kudos to being that type of person that people trust. And I know this from knowing you, that you can just feel that with a person. You can really get it quickly if this is a person you're going to trust or not. So great quality. And also, you told me, going to Smith, going to an all-girls school gave you the courage to speak up, because you never really had men to compare with in school. And so you didn't have to, women just tend to speak up when they're not worried about, getting criticized or judged or anything.
Well, I wasn't really particularly a leader at Smith, and I certainly wasn't challenged by my classmates in French at Smith, had I been one of the few who were in chemistry. But they were being challenged because it was difficult. They weren't challenged because they were being compared with men and deemed inferior. So
Right.
women's colleges teach women that it's appropriate to study any subject.
Right.
And as one Black student said to me, there's another student who had difficulty with the prelim, and then after he passed it, we would have workshops and he would coach other students, and he would say, look, this mathematics book doesn't care what race it is of the person studying it.
Right.
The material that is race neutral.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and why did you tell me that you thought, or somebody told, no, that you thought you were a bad manager?
Oh, well, I think I
You
was a
remember
bad.
that story?
Yeah, at the beginning, I wasn't a bad manager, but I had a marvelous I was very lucky in the quality of the people who were picked chairs, because the department is the biggest one at Berkeley, and the top ranked in the country, really high quality people. And anyway, he was quite diplomatic, but he said, in managing people, there are two models. There's the U and the V. And the U is where you sort of, let people go along and try to get the best out of them. And the V is where you're really kind of too close to what they're doing, managing too closely. And it was true. And I was expecting these people, who may have had little children or whatever, and for whom it was a job. I was expecting them to work as hard as I did, and that's not the proper expectation.
Right.
And so anyway, as soon as this was Paul Gray, and so then I turned around, and then I got several management prizes from the campus.
Yeah.
But it was how to get the best out of people, and it goes back to the issue of trust. If
Yes.
you trust them, you don't have to keep checking. They may need guidance, but it's a more collaborative. I switched from being a manager to being a collaborator.
Right.
And then I was given I was given a couple of troublesome people who hadn't done well and were going to be dismissed. And that was rewarding too, because they were women of color.
So much that you have been able to do. And we haven't even gotten to your most recent huge project, which I have a copy right here.
Oh,
Of Early Berkeley Women Doctoral Graduates by Sheila M. Humphreys. And can you just tell us a little bit about what that?
sure. So you'll have to stop me because I'll go on too long. But just the overview is that the chancellor wanted to celebrate the 150 years of women faculty, students, alumni, and staff since they were admitted to Cal in 1870. And then she asked me and Professor Kathy Gallagher, an English professor, to chair the history project, which is a part of this overall celebration. COVID intervened. Much of the celebration, the events were canceled, but the history project continued. So what I took on and decided what I could do was to go to every department and museum and research unit and try to get them to look back at their history and produce histories of women in rhetoric and Near Eastern studies and geology and the whole thing. I myself wrote 7 essays on women in STEM because those departments had been collapsed with other departments such as oceanography, went into integrative biology, and zoology disappeared, and the astronomy department didn't have anybody to do it. So anyway, I had a great deal of fun writing essays on all kinds of women in science. The volume that you're holding is just one part of it,
Which
but
pretty hefty. Yeah.
well, but the thing that I would like your listeners to know is that this entire project has been posted on the California Digital Library. So free of charge, with one click, you can read anything you want. And so it's a collection of 200 essays and many websites. There were 7,000 links, and it's now accessible to the public and to scholars.
And I think, so am I right in saying you find it at 150w.berkeley.edu?
That is where you can find it today, but the way to find it on the California Digital Library is just to type in on your Google bar, California Digital Library, which will come up. And on the right-hand side, about a third of the way down, you will see a little tab for e-scholarship, which stands for electronic scholarship. If you click on e-scholarship, a search bar will come up, and then you can put in 150W table of contents, and then that takes you everywhere that you might want to go. But it's just no other university has such a detailed history of women. So we're really pleased and pleased at so many contributors.
Right, right. And you got them to do this work and put it all together.
Well, some with difficulty. I'm still wrangling with the sociology department. But, that was another lesson, because the work I did for affirmative action sometimes was really, I had the position, but I had to use collegial persuasion or taking the moral high ground at the beginning because there was resistance. So for this 150W, to get overworked staff or faculty to spend time doing research was really a volunteer project and a labor of love. And so I did it. I had to go about it in different ways with different departments, which was itself amusing. So I got a kick out of it.
And a lot of work as well as being amusing. Yeah. At some point, I know somebody said to you, she pushes us.
That's true.
Yeah.
That was a black student who got his PhD, and he was the president of the Black Graduate Student Organization, which, like the women's organization, was enormously instrumental in pushing the faculty, because it wasn't one or two crankpots, it was more than that. And so we would, starting way back, we invited those groups to come to the annual faculty meeting where they review everything, including whom they're going to hire, and they would have a voice. And he did say she pushes us. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But he was saying it in a positive way.
So what would you, this is probably impossible, this question, but this is obviously, your work has so enriched your life and you as a person. And what would you say, because this is something in the heroine's journey, you go through, and we go on many heroine's journeys in our lifetime when we answer a call and we step out into the unknown. Eventually you complete that and you look back and say, these are the gifts that I gained from this particular journey. And could you even say, looking at all this, and I know you just finished this huge study on the women at Berkeley, but what's a major gift that came your way because of it?
Well, I can easily address that. The major gift is generations of rich friendships,
Mm,
and I'm relationships that mean a great deal to me, and I'm in touch with many of these students. And I think that our role, I'm 83, and I think our role is to lend a helping hand and to affirm people's aspirations and try to ease the path
yeah.
for them.
So how wonderful is that as a mission for life and a purpose in life, and to be able to say, I know that I did it. I know that I, with the help of many other people, I was able to help that
Well,
way.
they helped me too. As I said, it's a two-way street in any mentoring relationship. So, and
So,
I've learned a lot from you too, Susanna.
well,
How to
ditto,
improve.
may I say. I mean, so much of what you talk about, the gaining the trust and how it's a two-way street and the relationships are so important, applies to work as a coach and as a, person who I worked a lot with groups in conflict. So, um, yeah, yeah, I resonate with what you say. So here's the ending question, Sheila. Unless there's anything else that you want to make sure or that you think, oh, I wanted to say this.
Well, I think I'd like to say that we all know, I think we're all aware with the change in political leadership in our country, that the attacks on the work of educational access for underserved groups is going to be
Harder.
it's going to
Oh,
be much harder, much more challenging.
right.
And I think we all need to be aware of that. And I think education is a key to democracy.
Right.
For example, I think the more educated people are, the better able they are to distinguish between fake information, disinformation, and the truth. And so
Right.
I don't know what the future holds for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I think I think it's going to be a rough couple of years.
Well, it's interesting. It occurs to me, you and I have been trying to find a time to schedule this conversation for a while. And this is probably the best time for us to have had it and for this to be able to come out with your words. So,
Well, Suzanne, I did forget to say something. So I did want to point out that some of the students whom we admitted and who got their PhD, some of the Black students in particular, are now leaders. One is the president of the University of Maryland College Park. That's 40,000 students. One is Gary May, who's the first Black chancellor of University of California, Davis. One is Reginald DeRoche, who's the president of Rice University. So these students are giving back in a major way, and they are educational leaders. And there are many others I could name. Colin Paris, who's the head of the whole General Electric Digital, and Valerie Taylor at in Chicago, who's head of applied math and computer science at a national laboratory there. So they are, they are fulfilling the promise that we
right,
saw in them.
right. It's a ripple effect for sure. Yeah. And lucky that they were able to meet you.
I
And
was not, they didn't need my help. They were already fine, believe me.
I hear you. All right, final thing then. Final thing. So all the information that we've shared and the wisdom that you've shared with us, people listening, if they could only remember one thing from you, what would you want to leave them with?
One thing,
Because of what you've learned with
I
you.
would say one thing is try to bring out and affirm the best in people.
Mm, I love it. Try to affirm and bring out the best in people. Okay. Well, Sheila Humphreys, I am very grateful that you found the time in your obviously very busy life to talk with me and share with the people listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was fun.
And if somebody listens to this and says, I want to talk to that woman, then the best way is through email to get a
Sure.
hold of you. And that would be S. Humphreys, Humphrys at berkeley.edu. And
It's S. Humphreys, one word.
yes.
Yeah. S.
Yeah.
Humphreys at Berkeley, that has 3 E's,
E-
BERKELEY.edu.
Right,
And
right.
I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Yes, and this will be in the show notes, so you'll be able to have it there, and we'll include the link to the women's doctoral graduates that Sheila helped put together in the show notes, so people will be able to have that too. Okay, well, I thank everyone for taking your time in your day to listen to us talk, and I hope you will join me next month as we talk to somebody else, yet another heroine who has been willing to leave her comfort zone. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast for real life heroines. Your time and presence mean the world to us. If you're hungry for more inspiration and ready to craft your own heroine story, connect with Susanna outside of the show. Visit susannalillard.com to discover her courses and programs designed to empower you on your journey. Until next time, may your days be filled with the courage and strength of a true heroine. Stay inspired.